All right, welcome to Moonstruck Podcast, produced by Riot Radio. Here we focus on subjects relating to self-expression and personal development. I'm Ryan, and today we'll be discussing the 7 planets and the aspects, associated with each: emotions, mentality, being, for example. And we'll get into the depictions across various cultures. So in segment 1, we'll kind of just get into the 7 planetary spheres, which is, essentially we can list them off here. Here we got the first image up on the screen. But essentially it is Saturn, Moon, and then we have Mercury, we have Venus, we have Sun, and then we have Mars and Jupiter in that order, in descending to ascending order. And these are, representative of various things across culture. Even we can see it in modern days, such as the days of the week are named after these respective planets. So it's a very interesting concept when we get into it, Saturday, Saturn, Sunday, Sun. So it's very representational of basically, the chronologics of time, for example, when we think about how we categorize time or categorize things repeating in a cycle, especially in this 7 repetition, right? So we'll get into this here, and we'll talk about how this kind of spans across various aspects in culture. We can even see in religion or in spiritual tradition, such as the 7 deadly sins or 7 virtues. This also appears, right? So these are commonly associated with each of the planets. We got the picture up here on the screen, and maybe we'll come back to that later, but we have the 7 spirits are typically associated with each of these planetary spheres. And we'll just start kind of maybe in descending to ascending order here, where we have Saturn, which is typically associated with discipline. It's known as planet of time, essentially, which governs karma, it governs structure, it governs basically things bound up in security and density. It's a disciplined focus, right? So it's very, the word is the opposite of immutable. It's in a very dense state, which is not prone to change very easily. This is why it's also regarded as a planet of time cycles. So moving on, we have the moon, which is also connected to, actually in Saturn, it's also connected to being, which is the physical body. We'll get into actually how these relate to the chakras and energy centers after. But the moon connects to emotionality, and it connects to almost that feminine energy of fluidity and movement. Typically the moon is associated with water. We also know that the moon influences the tides. So that is one aspect which is sometimes overlooked. But remember, again, guys, we are 75% water, about that anyway. So to think that the moon is not going to affect us in some way is kind of absurd. To think that it's only going to affect bodies of water when we are in fact a body of water. We're maybe just not a large scale body of water as some of the other sources. So it affects movement of water, which is representative of emotions. It connects to basically this lunar sphere in the what is it? I think it's the greater key of Solomon, or it could be perhaps the lesser key of Solomon. I have to revise on it. But essentially in the key of Solomon, it refers to this as Lavana, and this kind of governs a lot of connection between emotionality, such as family, around your common emotional states, how you're able to maneuver yourself through energies. The practice of Tai Chi is also very related to this concept of the moving of energy and moving of bodies of water. So that's why you see the old people in the park practicing Tai Chi or whatever. This is what they're doing. They're moving the energy around the body, the subtle bodies. So important practice. if you so choose to participate in it. There's also other practices that you can do, such as meditation or such as pranayama, pranic breathing, um, all sorts of exercises that you can do that really relate to this movement of energy in the subtle bodies or in the emotional bodies, which kind of help to relieve that blocked energy. And maybe we'll move on to Mercury. This is a planet which I am really interested to talk about because it is also a planet associated with willpower. It's associated with heat and fire. As we know, Mercury is the closest planet to the sun, as you can see in the diagram. And I think what this kind of represents is, that heat that, a lot of time you see, like, for example, in pictures of Jesus, you see him with his heart on fire. It's the same concept, the heart almost you could think of as the instrument of the divine that bridges the body in the physical realm to the spiritual realm, right? And Mercury is almost a place where the fire is ignited. It's below the heart. It's the center, right below the heart. It's associated with the solar plexus. And this is where that heat is generated in the body. Now, I'm going to take a sip of tea here, but just think about that, for example, the liver, it's associated with Prometheus in various traditions or various depictions of historical stories or Greek mythology, right? He stole fire away from the gods. Why is that relevant? Because fire is the instrument of transmutation and alchemy. He gave alchemy to people, essentially, is what it's saying. So, but think about that. So, essentially, that's what's going on there. That fire is the element which is the transmuter, the ultimate transmuter. And we'll go back over the subtle associations with these planets and their respective spirits in a moment. So we'll move on to Venus, which is typically associated with love and divine feminine energy, and this is typically associated with harmony, romance, connection with others, and not just love in a romantic sense, but love also in the purest sense of what are you magnetized to, what is within your soul that draws you to something or polarizes you to or away from something. So the magnetic field around the body is essentially governed by this planet, which is why it is so kind of correlated to even Earth. It's considered Earth's evil twin sometimes. That's what NASA calls it anyway, on their website. So we can see kind of some of these depictions of these planets kind of spanning out across various depictions and seeing in different lights. I guess one of the things to note about this is that Venus is also, it has a, in this is in science now we're talking about, it has a toxic or poisonous atmosphere. It has methane gas in the atmosphere, sulfuric gas, which essentially erodes anything, right? And dissolves everything within the atmosphere. And this is kind of interesting to note because Venus and the soul has almost ionizing property, which is the thing that is going to fuel that fire. It's associated with the element of wind as well, as opposed to Mercury, which is associated with fire. So taking that into account, we can kind of think about this as wind associated with Venus is the fuel which will enable the fire to burn or ionize the blood, in awakening, right? A lot of people might not understand these concepts because they are very deep and introspective and spiritual in terms of you being on your awakening process. So if you don't understand them, then you'll probably get to that part in your journey where these will start to make a bit more sense to you. You know, if you're somebody who's tuning into this show who's not really on that type of journey, some of this might sound like complete nonsense, but that's okay because we're here to learn. And anybody who is not interested in that can take a walk, right? So I guess we'll move on to the sun now, which is the essential originator of all that energy in the first place. And it is commonly linked with identity and the aspects which are associated with your personality or the authenticity of your personality. So the characteristics which kind of make you, right? They are really linked to also your I guess your birth chart, if you want to say, we're not going to go into the zodiacs and all that stuff. We're just talking about the traditional planetary magic here, almost as it's described in, for example, the Ars Paulina, which is within the Key of Solomon. And this is essentially the center which can revitalize the body or lead to awakening, right? And when somebody's sun is tainted, it means their personality is tainted, or it's not being expressed, or it's out of alignment. Your spirit is out of alignment. So when your sun is really liberated, it leads to that aspect of revitalization and energy flowing and that reverberation effect that is, the sun, if you think about it, it causes time and space to ripple with how much energy it produces, right? If there was no sun, there would be no us, and there would be no consciousness here to function, right? So the sun is what, I guess lets everything grow in the first place, or leads to the production of life. Understanding that is something imperative to the proliferation of life and the continuation of life is really important. And also, if we want to think about it from a scientific or physics perspective, sun or vibrational energy, which is associated with, because this is associated with the throat center, is creating a toroidal field. Venus, which is associated with the heart, creates a magnetic field, and Mercury, which is associated with the solar plexus, creates an electric field. And those oscillations create light. They create light itself. And we'll move on to the one of the highest centers of the body, which is associated with the third eye and is associated with the planet Mars. And maybe we'll get into a little bit of a deep subject here, because we're getting into a planet which is typically associated with the bringer of light, which we'll get into when we review just the spirits and the associating angels with the planets. And essentially, this is the planet which is typically associated with the divine masculine energy, which is the counterpart to the Venusian or Venus energy. So this is the Martian energy, the aspect of the masculine energy. So that's what Mars is typically associated with. It's typically associated with war, battle, strength, anything that is typically requiring very strong, they describe it as military affairs when they relate it back to the respective spirits that are representative of these planets. So that is essentially what Mars represents, very outward energy, reflective or inverse or contrast to the Venusian Venus energy. So to move on, we'll talk about Jupiter now, which is the highest center associated with the crown. And this is really what leads to expansion, wisdom, spiritual enlightenment, and the expansion of fortune or riches, it typically is the expansion of that auric or magnetic field, or, and if you've watched Evangelion, Justin, you probably are familiar with this reference, but the AT field, this is what powers the expansion of the AT field. So Jupiter is the planet associated with that center, which is associated with expansion. It's also associated with the element sometimes of lightning or storms, and it's very powerful in terms of being able to connect you to divine energy, and it really represents the detachment from, I guess, base instincts, which are typically associated with the lower spheres, such as Saturn and the moon and everything else, or Saturn and moon, So now we'll get into maybe the spirits associated with each. So maybe we'll go to, I think I have a diagram of the light body on there. So if you are watching or listening in and you're only able to hear audio, then I'll kind of describe what is associated with each. But the root center, which is associated with Saturn, is associated with the spirit Aratron. It's also associated with the archangel Tzafkiel, which governs that sphere, and that is associated with, again, discipline and these type of modalities, and it is said that he recruits subterranean spirits to assist that energy associated with him. And then we have the sacral center associated with Moon, and that governs water, and it's said that the spirit associated with that, Phul, spelled Phul, is typically associated with converting things into the metal silver. And what that represents, it's not talking about literal silver, but it's saying that you refine energy in the body into a state like silver, in which each of these metals correlates to each center, and silver is representative of the refined emotional energy, and which is highly magnetized, or able to, or I shouldn't say magnetized, but it's a conductor. It's able to conduct electricity really well. And we'll get into now, I guess, the archangel associated with that planet is also the archangel Gabriel, which is associated in, especially you see Christian, Islamic, Jewish traditions associated with messengering. He's regarded as the strength of God. Also, Tzafkiel, associated with Saturn. The root center is associated. He's known as the contemplation of God. Gabriel in the sacral center is regarded as God is my strength, or the messenger of God. And then the higher center, the solar plexus center, which is associated with the spirit Ophiel, which is known to be the spirit who can transmute anything and transform quicksilver into the philosopher's stone. And that's an interesting concept, but basically what it's saying is that you are taking something which is in a fluid state, which can be pretty much anything, and transform it into a refined pure stone which is capable of transmuting any energy. So that is a very interesting concept, just regarding the solar plexus, which is also associated with the liver. We go back to the myth of Prometheus, you could say, which is, I guess, depicting this concept of alchemy, right? And this center is associated with Archangel Michael, known as the one who is like God, the strongest of all the archangels. And he is, again, has the flaming sword of heaven, which can, I talked about this in a previous episode, is able to almost cut the threads on the loom of fate. This is metaphorical. Cut the threads on the loom of fate, basically releasing karma, releasing energy. So it's the almost the inverse energy of the root center, because instead of the root center, which holds karma, the solar plexus is cutting the ties of karma and releasing karma, to releasing energy. So that's essentially what that center is associated with. It's associated with the spirit Ophiel, which is the spirit who can transmute these things, and the archangel Michael, which is the archangel who sits above that level on the angelic scale or the cosmic scale, who can step in to do battle or defend, specifically defend. You can almost think of him as, if you were in court, he'd be the defense, you know, the one who is on the opposite side of the prosecution, right? So now we have the heart center, which is associated with the spirit Haggith, and again, this is associated with the wind element. And you know, it's said that she has the ability to convert copper into gold, and what that essentially means is you take a conductor, which is a base level conductor like copper, and basically give it an upgrade to something like gold, which can transfer the energy or conduct the energy in a lot more of a rhythmic or pattern that is free of resistance and is erosion resistant, right? If you think about the difference between those two materials, just in terms of even science or basic knowledge, you could think of copper as something that is typically used at a very base level. Gold is something a lot more refined, and it's something that is essentially, I guess, a lot more elite in terms of what it can do in terms of its magnetic or electric capacity to conduct. So it's probably worth noting that also, for example, in the Bible, it talks about the church of maybe we'll pull that up for a brief second. It has a picture of all the 7 churches. The church of Thyatira, which is related to this heart center, again associated with the planet Venus or the Venusian energy. And I believe it's said that the quote is, to the angel of this church, and his one associated with this, his feet are like fine grass, and his eyes are unto a flame of fire. And it's also mentioned at certain points that you know, in the Bible is said that encourage you to buy gold dried in the fire, and that's essentially relating to this center. Is essentially saying that when you connect with the virtues of this center, when you connect with the virtues of the heart and the virtues of the soul, then you are essentially, it's almost like you're buying good energy from the cosmos, or you're buying good karma, or you're buying a basically a type of energy that gives you an upgrade from that gold, or from that copper to gold, gives you an upgrade in terms of your soul, or your soul's capacity to conduct or to operate magnetically. So maybe we'll go back to the prior picture. Thanks. And we'll talk about now the sun, or sun, which is associated with the throat center. And this is typically associated with, I almost forgot, a heart center associated with Haggith, and also the archangel Anael, which is associated with love, sexuality. Sometimes she is even associated with the moon as well, but typically associated with the element of wind. And also she does help in relieving emotional damage, or helping nurture emotional wounds, or healing emotionality. And then we move up to the throat center, which is associated with sun and the spirit Och, spelled Och, and he is essentially the one who is able to really I guess reverberate this sound of the body, and then relate to this concept of I guess, exalting to higher positions and vibrating at a level which you can move to a higher level within life, right? It's almost, you can think of it like the four lower centers: root, sacral, solar plexus, heart. You're tied to the levels of karma and time. This is the level above that, which you're moving beyond the level of time. You're moving to a level in which you are associated with a dimension that is above that. So now you are able to connect with things on a etheric level, which is beyond the constraints of time. So almost think, if you're picturing something mentally or in your imagination, you can you can picture something in your imagination, and you have it on a spiritual level at that point, right? You have it on a level that is interacting with the element of light, but it's not in the physical yet, right? You can use your imagination freely across space and time. You can picture something that happened in the past. You can project it onto something you want to happen in the future. You can project it either into the past or into the future or into any moment in time, right? But that is still not here in the physical. That's the third eye we're talking about. The throat center is almost the gateway to that, where you're at that level where it's the intermediary between the third eye and the heart center, which it's causing this reverberation effect to start the awakening process, to start that attainment of a higher vibration or higher energy level. So very big concepts again, and this again is associated with the spirit Ak and the archangel Raphael, which is associated with healing. And this is all very interesting. You know, he also, in some stories, in the book of Tobit, for example, he is sometimes called Azariah, and it's kind of little bit of a side tangent to what we're talking about here today, but it's an interesting angel to do a bit of background research on, seeing that a lot of the archangels other than Michael are not really too regarded in these books, with the exception of also Gabriel, so Gabriel and Michael, but the rest of them are not so much talked about. So it is interesting to see that he is mentioned in a story or two in the book of Tobit. And again, he relates to the aspect of healing or realigning vibration, and essentially that aspect of awakening or connecting with the authenticity of the self to generate that healing vibration or healing process or revitalization process. And it's interesting that typically he is associated with the more traditional aspects of the creator, which you can say is the traditional alignment of the cosmos. You know, we can say that he is the traditionalist almost among the archangels, because he is enforcing the etheric sphere, the solar sphere, right? In the Key of Solomon is regarded as Shemesh, the sun. So that's Raphael. He's associated with the throat center. And the last thing I'll note on this is that also that raises you up to levels where you can, it says that the one who interacts with the energy of Ak is also exalted to higher positions in society, or the kings of the world will bow at his feet, or something to that effect. So moving on, we'll go to the third eye center, which is associated with, again, the planet Mars. And this is where we get into the spirit of Phaleg. The spirit of Phaleg, which is basically the spirit associated with governing military affairs, governing the effects of battle, or the strength that is associated with battle, right? So you can think of him as the artillery, right? The driving force behind that, the masculine energy, right? You're talking about outward moving energy. Again, the counterpart to the divine feminine of the heart center. So all very interesting in this kind of deep sense. And when we talk about almost this concept of awakening, we are getting into very deep topics, and you know, the ability to generate a very direct and outward force based on a source like light, which is associated with the third eye because it is the element of the third eye, typically is this direct force which expands outward, right? And is also associated with the archangel Samael. And I know they might have some different depictions of him across culture, but essentially the reoccurring theme is he's regarded as the light bringer, right? Sometimes he's confused with, the adversary or Lucifer or whatever, but he's really representative of a force of divine judgment. So almost you can think of him as, I said Michael is the defense almost if you were in a court case. You could think of Samael as the prosecution, the one who will say, okay, well, this is essentially everything that is against you, right? And then Michael is the defense, saying that this is your will versus almost the aspect of the divine, right? So, but they're two aspects of the same force, right? They're just two different points. So Samael associated with light, Michael associated with the element of fire and will. So back to the third eye, back to Samael. This concept also in theosophy is pretty interesting because sometimes when we talk about, for example, Rudolf Steiner, we're getting a little short on time, so we'll have to sum up in not too long. So we'll maybe skip the virtues and sins today because we can you guys can do your own research on that. I just want to cover the big topics here. But essentially Samael, sometimes it's regarded as, he's a light bringer. When the light bringer falls, you get this almost process of the opposite of awakening. It's called fallen. When they say fallen angels, this is the aspect of fallen, because you can fall on the spiritual path to enlightenment or whatever too, right? And when you do that, when you fall on this path, then essentially that is the light bringer coming down, and the light bringer can be redeemed. This is the thing, the divine eye, this is what's called the divine individuality, can be redeemed, meaning the objectivity of the individual as a being in their self can be redeemed. Because when you fall as a divine being, and again, this is my perspective on it and my understanding from all these, works of theosophy and whatnot, and the Key of Solomon, when you fall as a spiritual being, you lose that objectivity or sense of delineation from you and the external world. But when you realign that, you have this almost level of objectivity that is separating you and everything in the external world, because you have your objective eye with you. So moving on, but again, the point of that is that the light bringer can be redeemed and he can rise again. He can go back to the individuality of objectiveness. So moving on, we'll finish up with the crown center here, and this is associated with the spirit that is Bathor, and he is the one who is said to give wisdom and give expansion of riches and essentially this energy of expansion and fortune, right? So again, expanding the AT field. So this is typically associated with also Archangel Tazadkiel, and he is kind of the one who is known as divine mercy or divine forgiveness. So this is interesting when we get to that concept of redeeming oneself or reconnecting with divine. Is also regarded as the aspect of enlightenment. So you're freeing yourself from the aspects that are associated with everything that would hold you back in the material realm. So we've covered quite a bit today across cultures. So again, we've covered the planets, we've covered the spirits associated with each planet, we've covered the 7 days of the week, we've covered the 7 archangels. So I guess in order, it goes planetary spheres, then planetary spirits, then planetary archangels, and the days of the week are associated with that linearly. And yeah, you can do your research to relate that to the sins, for example, willpower associated with pride, associated with humility as the counterpart. And we didn't get time to get into the ego and shadow of that, basically the reverse or opposite aspects of that, which are associated with, say, pride on one side, the ego, humility on the other side is the aspect of releasing pride or finding humility to overcome shame, stuff like that. So all these are kind of built in. And, we covered the 7 energy centers associated with each. You basically got Magic 101 in probably 36 minutes. You got Magic 101 there in the planetary spheres, So yeah, I think we'll sum it up there for today. So we covered quite a bit. You can always follow me on Instagram at top_sorcerer. I am starting up a new platform that is going to be called the Sword of Mercury. And you can basically follow me or subscribe to my channel there for YouTube, and they're going to be producing some content around fitness, around whiteboard elaborations, bigger whiteboard than this. So, and we'll get into more detailed stuff, and maybe on a longer term basis around maybe longer lectures or more engaging, interesting concept that is a little bit more flexible in what we can cover. And yeah, that's pretty much it for our show today. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got a lot out of that, because that, again, is pretty much Magic 101, not following the left or right hand path, but essentially the middle aspect of magic, or the planetary magic. If you want to learn more about that, I recommend you look into the Ars Paulina in the Key of Solomon. And we'll sum up there. Today, this has been Moonstruck right here on Riot Radio. I'm your host, Ryan, and take care.